This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we'll show you how to go from employee truck driver to savvy business owner. And we'll do it together because we're starting our own trucking company, Haulin Assets, so you'll get a front row seat through the whole process. Together with some experts in the field, we'll teach you how to set up a business, buy a truck, get your DOT and MC numbers, get insurance, and a lot more. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everybody, to episode 26 of the Haulin Assets podcast. I'm Craig, and joining me on the road once again is Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Craig. How's it going?
Not too bad, not too bad. I do want to remind everybody that full show notes are at haulinassetsllc.com. You can also go to motorcarrierhq.com if you're looking for some of the tools, things that we talk about on these episodes. So make sure you visit both of those places. Chris, any housekeeping items you want to go through before we get started today?
Yeah, I just kind of like to mention, if this is somebody's first time listening to this podcast is really meant to kind of be listened in order. So go back, start with episode number 1, and quickly catch up here to episode number 26.
Yeah, luckily there was no learning curve. We were perfect in episode 1, just as good as we've ever been, right, Chris?
I'll let you believe that.
All right. Well, today we're going to talk about controlling your circumstances, which is an interesting title, I think, and it's an interesting concept because of how little I feel like sometimes I can control my circumstances. But we're going to get there in just a moment. First, as per usual, Chris, I want to ask you, how are things on the road?
They've been going pretty well. I'm kind of in the middle of my first winter snowstorm. Not going to get too much into that, but it's October and it feels like February.
And where are you right now?
I'm in Denver.
Yeah. Okay. So a winter storm there is no joke, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a lot of snow coming down.
Yeah. Well, what happened last week with the last time I talked to you? You were stuck at a shipper, and it was taking you 8 hours to get loaded. Whatever happened there?
I actually ended up being stuck there. So there was a load that had 3 pickups, and I was stuck at pickup number 2 for over 9 hours before I finally got out of there. It was ridiculous.
9 hours?
Yeah, that kind of thing gets frustrating.
Hey, I can imagine. I mean, look, I could load up your stuff with all my household furniture faster than that.
Yeah, you get a few friends, and it wouldn't take that long. Yeah, I don't know. They must have been like loading it by hand or one box at a time. I don't know. It was pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, that's amazing. So yeah, what did you end up doing? How did it turn out?
So that load was just kind of almost a little bit of a nightmare. After I left that shipper, obviously I was late to the next appointment, like 4 hours late, and I thought they were going to put me in a work-in status, so I was going to end up spending another 5 or 6 hours there. But luckily I got there. It's kind of funny because I get there and I tell the lady, I'm sorry I'm late. I tried my best not to be late. I showed up at my previous pickup 2 hours early, and I was there for over 9 hours, and she, without skipping a beat, named exactly who the distributor was. She's like, yeah, that happens 2 or 3 times a week. We're used to it. She said, we're not too busy today, so we'll be able to get you right in. So luckily they got me right in, got me loaded up, and then that's kind of when things took a turn for the worst.
Oh, it got worse after that?
Yeah, it's crazy because what happened was they only ended up loading. They were supposed to load 4 pallets at that last place. Well, those 4 pallets were 10,000 pounds, and the other 20 pallets in front of it were really light. And so what ended up happening is it ended up putting just a ton of weight on my back tandems. And to make a long story short, I go check the weight on my air scale on the back of my trailer, and I knew things weren't looking very good. I slid my tandems all the way back to the rear, which I normally don't drive that way, just to see if I could get as much weight off the tandems on the drives as I could. And even after doing that, they had a scale there. I weighed myself, and I was still 280 pounds over.
Well, at 280 pounds, that's pretty close. So couldn't you just shift some weight around and get around it that way?
We should have been able to. I mean, the easiest thing in that kind of a situation would be is, okay, you pull those heavy pallets off, you pull maybe four of the pallets in front of it off as well, put the heavy pallets in front, and then load those other lighter ones towards the back. Well, so I talked to that third shipper about doing that, and they're like, nope, we're not going to touch somebody else's product. We don't want to assume that liability. And you can kind of understand that. And so, after a few phone calls with the brokers, to make a long story short, that third shipper just ended up pulling their stuff off the load completely.
No way. So Did you lose that income then from that load?
No, luckily, because it's not my fault. This actually, it turns out to be a good thing for me, because it probably ended up with all the shifting, figuring out what was going on. I ended up being there an hour longer than I would have otherwise, but I dropped 10,000 pounds on the load, which helps me on my fuel economy and makes things a little bit easier that way. Still get paid the same amount, and it was all good. It's kind of funny though, because I had to go 50 miles out of my way to that third shipper. Well, 50 miles each way, so 100 miles total round trip to get to that third shipper, and didn't even end up taking their load.
Oh, so okay, so maybe you didn't come out ahead, but at least it didn't hurt you as bad as it could have.
Yeah, no, it didn't hurt me at all.
Okay.
I got paid the same amount. I was getting paid for those extra 100 miles. It just, I drove all the way down there and then all the way back right in the direction I was heading in. So I just, it took time that if I would have known, I wouldn't have had to do. But it's all good, because I get paid the same amount and have to haul less weight.
Okay, well, silver linings, bright sides, and all that stuff. But I mean, it's still pretty annoying. You kind of just want things to go the way that they're scheduled to go. Is there anything that you could have done or that you might do in the future to prevent something like that?
A lot of the times the shippers will show how much weight you're going to be carrying on the bill of lading, and they showed the gross weight, but they didn't show the weight by stops. And if I would have seen the weight by stops, I probably would have been that looks a little crazy. And the broker, really what they should have done is they should have had me load that heavier stuff up first and then load the lighter pallets, and I probably would have been okay that way.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, speaking of preventing something like that, today, Chris, you wanted to talk about controlling your circumstances. This is something, like I said, I was kind of being a little bit flippant up top, but it feels like I'm never in control of my circumstances. Welcome to adulthood, right? But this is something you feel kind of passionate about, is that there are things you can do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't 100% control your circumstances. I mean, there's things that are going to come at you, and you can't help that from happening. What you can do is you can be in a position to be able to, roll with the punches, or be able to work through that situation and not have it negatively impact you any more than it has to. And sometimes those circumstances turn into a positive thing. One of the things you hear all the time is you create your own luck, and a lot of the times that's the truth. You have a situation come on you, or an opportunity to do something, and if you've prepared yourself prior to, and you can jump on that opportunity. Some people call that luck. Other people say it's being prepared for something that comes your way, and you get lucky because of that preparation that you had.
Right. Well, as my guiding light said, I believe it was Obi-Wan Kenobi who said, "I don't believe there's any such thing as luck." So you have your business leaders. I have my idols. Okay, Chris?
Speaking of business leaders, the whole thing that kind of brought this up was a couple months ago, I was listening to the adjutant general for the state of Utah, the National Guard. He's a 2-star general. He was giving a speech, and one of the things that he said was, he says, luck favors the prepared. And that's kind of, just exactly what I was saying there, is if you're prepared, for circumstances that hit you, it either gives you the ability to capitalize on an opportunity, or it helps you get through kind of a tough situation. So that preparedness is really kind of one of the things I want to talk a little bit more about today.
Okay. Well, yeah, go on then. It's something I'm excited to learn about for myself, to be perfectly honest. Convince me, Chris.
So, Craig, I think kind of what this really boils down to is, similarly, you have a circumstance or situation that you find yourself in, and you often handle that differently depending kind of on your level of preparation or decisions that you've made that have led up to that event. And I think one really good example we can use to kind of illustrate this is talking a little bit about debt. It's kind of something we're all familiar with. And I'm going to use the example of two people in a video that we used to kind of explain the factoring and accounts receivable financing and why you may or may not want to use that. We follow kind of the story of two guys, two truckers, so Cash and Richard. And, Cash is kind of the smarter guy, Richard, the not so smart guy. And so I'm going to use them kind of in this same example. So Cash, let's say for 3 years, he's made the conscious decision to get out of debt, accomplished that goal, and has saved up a little bit of money. So he's out of debt, saved money. And then you've got Richard during that same period has kind of been a little bit more frivolous. He's gone out and he's bought a really nice car. He's furnished his house. He's racked up some credit card debt, some automobile debt, and other debt, and virtually has no savings. Well, these guys, if they face the same circumstance, let's say they both lose their job at the same time, Cash is in a much better position to handle that, and he can kind of control his circumstances. He can, take his time to search for that new job, find the right job, and land back on his feet, fairly quickly. Whereas Richard, he's kind of probably really stressed and desperate because he's out of a job, has bills that are coming due, and his circumstance, even though it's the same circumstance as Mr. Cash, he's in a much worse position because he's got all these things looming over his head because of decisions that he'd made in the past to go into debt. And so, even though they're in the same circumstance, they treat it really, really different. And that happens a lot in trucking and in other kind of situations in life.
Let's call out the first interesting thing about this, and that's that you named your good character Cash. Chris, I feel like you're being pretty transparent here.
Yeah, you know me. I mean that's I kind of have a one-track mind sometimes. I like to make my money.
Yes, you do, and your allegories are transparent. No, but okay. So this is you're taking a situation where you've got full-time employees and losing jobs and that sort of thing, but we're talking about business ownership here in this podcast. So tell me how you would apply this to owning a trucking company.
Well, I actually have a couple good experience that have happened to me in the last little bit that kind of really illustrate and highlight this. So let me talk. I recently picked up a load in Washington, and I was headed from Washington to the Joplin, Missouri area. And during that load, it had a little bit of time built into it, and I was going through Salt Lake, so I was able to stop at home and stay at home for about a day. Well, when I got there, it's October, near the end of October, and I decided to look at the weather reports because I know the weather is going to start getting pretty bad. And, lo and behold, you can see this big, huge storm front that's moving in. And so I ended up leaving Salt Lake about 4 or 5 hours earlier than I was anticipating to kind of stay ahead of the storm.
So basically the exact opposite of those Storm Chasers shows that I used to watch.
Yeah, exactly. I was running away from the storm.
Very brave of you, Mr. Military Man.
Yeah, that's being prepared. That's kind of trying to stay in control of your circumstance. So what ended up happening is I was able to stay ahead of that storm when I was leaving Utah on I-80, and when I kind of hit the Cheyenne area a little before Cheyenne, the weather was just starting to turn. Well, I knew if I could get about 50 to 100 miles into Nebraska, the storm would go, was staying west of that, which I ended up doing. I got through, stopped that night into Nebraska, completely missed the storm. Well, they ended up closing I-80 down that night, and if I would have left that 4 or 5 hours earlier, I would have been caught in that storm probably when I-80 closed and would have been stuck and not being able to move, would have missed my delivery time, and I had another load on top of that I was already scheduled to pick up, I would have missed that. It would have just turned into an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, I can imagine. You said they shut down I-80 completely between here and there?
Yeah, they did.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, so you would have been, well, screwed if you had...
I'd have been stuck in that. Best case scenario, I would have had to drive really slow and probably still would have been late for that delivery. I may have still been able to make the pickup for my next load, but if I would have got caught in it when it got closed, I definitely would have I would have been stuck for, I think it was closed for almost 24 hours.
Wow. Okay. Well, so in this case, this is what you're talking about, where it's one person looks at that and says, wow, lucky you didn't get caught in that storm. But what you're saying is, no, it's not about the luck of the situation. It's about thinking a little bit ahead and looking at the weather report and understanding, it's situational awareness, if we want to bring the military stuff back into it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, the whole control your circumstances kind of comes in, because I left early. I stayed in control of that load the whole way through. If I wouldn't have left early, if I would have just left when I was planning on leaving and would have got caught in that storm, that's where the circumstances all of a sudden starts controlling me, because I can't get through, I can't get to my delivery, and I can't get to that next pickup. And it creates this chain ball reaction of just bad things.
Yeah, no kidding. So what's another example then of something you've done recently to control your circumstances?
Well, I can give an example of where I didn't control my circumstances and kind of had to learn the hard way.
Those are my favorite. One positive,
Chris. Yeah, one positive example and one that's a little bit more humbling. It wasn't a terrible thing, but this is bad things happen, and this one was probably preventable. So my trailer has a system that inflates the air on it. And there's a light on the corner of the trailer that lights up if for some reason it's not able to maintain the air pressure that it's supposed to. Well, several weeks ago, that light started coming on. Like if I was parked for my 10-hour reset and I'd start back up, the light would be on for maybe 10 minutes or so as I first started driving down the road. So that light would stay on for the first 10 minutes as I'm driving down the road, which is an indication there's probably some kind of small leak, and something needs to get fixed. Well, me being a dummy, I just kind of ignored it. I figured it probably wasn't anything that was too big of a deal. Well, not too long after that, a week or two after that, I noticed that one of my tires is really starting to wear bald badly, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to need to get it fixed and quickly. Well, I didn't get it fixed fast enough, and it ended up blowing out on the road. And so I had to deal with a over-the-road repair, which took me time out of my schedule to have that happen. So I didn't end up missing my delivery time, but it threw a wrench into things. And then I also ended up paying way more for a replacement tire than I should have, because you're kind of desperate and you're limited on where you can go because you got to get it done right then.
Right. So, yeah, I guess the point here being, if you had kind of paid attention to those warning signs, you were aware of what's going on, but you just kind of decided, I can put this off until you couldn't, right?
Yeah, I ignored the warning signs. I didn't take action, and then I suffered the consequences. It's another one of those. It's an example of where, in that situation, the circumstances controlled me. The tire ended up blowing, and at that point, there's nothing I can do but pay more money for a tire than I should have to, and I lose time on the road because I was a dummy.
I'm starting to get shades of our earlier conversations about savings, Chris. Am I about to get another lecture?
You know what, Craig? You're almost like you're a prophet. You can see the future.
Well, yeah. Like I said, your analogies are thin, Chris. They're thin.
I'm predictable, if anything, right? Yeah, that's another one of those things. Savings. I know people probably kind of get sick of me harping on it, but I really, truly, and honestly believe that savings and having a cushion is the biggest thing that will determine whether you're successful or not. The guys that fail are people that don't save money and don't have money set aside, spend everything they make, versus the person that's a little bit more disciplined and religiously sets that money aside. Because there's a lot of things that come up in trucking expenses that are predictable. You know you're going to have maintenance issues. You know you're going to have repairs. You know you're going to have to replace your tires and brakes. All that stuff is going to happen. And if you have saved money, you get to be a little bit more in control when those circumstances occur.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense where, like you said, you can't control everything. You can't be ready for every weather situation, but you can be ready for some of them if you pay attention, right? So you can at least do something.
Yeah, if you're prepared and you plan ahead and you're methodical about what you do, you're way more likely to be successful, and those bumps that come aren't going to be as bad.
Well, as a concept, as well as maybe an episode, I feel like this is a pretty short and sweet one. Do what you can to be aware of what's going on around you and what your situation is, and you'll be able to weather some of those storms, so to speak, Chris.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that kind of wraps it up pretty well.
All right, well, very good. I like this one, Chris, and I'm excited to see what happens going forward and what other examples you have, good and bad, going forward. So I will, at this point, just remind everybody that if you want to get the full show notes for this episode or any others, go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com. Like you said, Chris, this podcast is kind of meant to be consumed sequentially. So, I like to think that people can come in wherever and hopefully get something out of each one of our episodes. But if you want to get the full effect of seeing a trucking company started from beginning to end, and we're talking even pre-beginning, right, Chris? I mean, we were talking about everything you had to do before you even started this company. You can do that from episode 1 on. So I definitely encourage people to go check that out. Chris, any other parting words before we go?
Only other thing is, we try to do this podcast as a service to everybody. We offer it for free. Anybody can listen, hopefully gain some of the nuggets of wisdom that we're hopefully providing. And then we just ask that if you would rate us on whatever platform you use to listen to the podcast, so we can get the message out to even more people.
Yes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, for all three of you using that platform. Seriously, it is a big help to us, and we would greatly appreciate that. All right, Chris, well, enjoy your blizzard in Denver, and I guess I will see you next week.
Sounds great. We'll see you then.